I'm Dave Kassler, amateur radio call sign KE0OG. Welcome to Ask Dave, episode 87. Today we look at two single-band wire antennas from MFJ, the MFJ-6120 end-fed Zepp for 20 meters, which sells for $39.95 US list, and the MFJ-6220 Collinear wire antenna array, which sells for $49.95 US. Both these antennas were designed by Fred Race, now a silent key. When you look at the underlying theory, they're closely related antennas. MFJ sent these to me for evaluation along with a couple of others that you'll see in upcoming videos. Anticipating the antennas, I set up my own version of a test range, which was simply two 20-foot masts in the backyard with pulleys. The masts are 75 feet apart, easily fitting a 40-meter half-wave dipole. So, just to test the poles, I constructed a standard 40-meter dipole using scrap materials, which worked as expected, meaning very well. So, the next tests were for the 6120 and the 6220, both of which are 20-meter single-band antennas. Let's look at these antennas to see how similar they are. Do you remember my video on the J-pole? The J-pole consists of an end-fed half-wave dipole that is fed at the end of a quarter-wave transmission line. The line is shorted at the bottom, giving it a zero impedance, and 1/4 wavelength away at the top, it has very high impedance. Now, a dipole has low impedance in the middle, but very high at the end. So, by attaching the half-wave dipole end to the quarter-wave point on the transmission line, the high-impedance antenna works very well with the high-impedance transmission line. Well, we'll see that same principle at work here. Let's fold the dipole down so it's horizontal. It's fed with a quarter-wave stub shorted on one end, offering zero impedance, and attached to the antenna at the high impedance end. The question is where and how to feed it, and we answer that question the same way as for a J-pole. Move up the feed line and the impedance climbs from zero to very high, meaning hundreds to thousands of ohms. As it turns out, just like on the J-pole, the 50 ohm point is pretty much near the bottom. Sounds cool, doesn't it? In theory, assuming the lengths are right, taking into account the 95% velocity factor associated with wire, it in fact should work. I might add a bit of history here. The German Zeppelins were giant, rigid structures filled with hydrogen or helium, or basically a complicated balloon with propellers. This photo shows the Los Angeles, built for the U.S. Navy by the Zeppelin Company. The Zeppelins were under development at the same time radio technology was progressing from spark to continuous wave, and the radio antenna on the airship hung straight down, although of course in flight it would tend to trail back. The only way to feed such an antenna was at its top end, thus an end-fed antenna for the Zeppelin, or more commonly, an end-fed Zepp. Well, let's add a complexity here. Given that this point on the feed line is also at theoretically infinite impedance, we could attach another end-fed dipole here. Can we do that? Of course. Now, as soon as we do that, it's not an end-fed Zepp any longer. In fact, it is an array of two half-wave dipoles. The power is divided between the two of them. They are collinear, meaning simply that they're on the same line. Such an antenna is no longer a dipole, but rather an array of two dipoles and has gain. The bidirectional gain is concentrated perpendicular to the array as shown in the diagram. Now, in practice, the gain isn't much, perhaps a couple dB, so that should be less than half an S unit. However, my testing, which you'll see later, shows it to be more effective than that. Okay, now let's concentrate on the Zepp. It comes in a yellow bag like this with everything carefully wound together. Let's go install it on my antenna test bed. Let's note a few things about installation. First, unroll things carefully and deliberately. If you just let the wire go, you'll have an endless tangle, so hold firm to the roll of wire as you cut the tie wraps. Then, as you step backwards, carefully unroll the wire. Be sure to unroll it rather than just pull it off in curls, because this wire takes a twist. Then do the same with the matching stub. Now, the fiberglass board that hosts the connection between the matching stub and the dipole itself also provides a hole to put the end of a rope through. Note that the manual says to keep the matching stub at least 5 feet away from a metal mast. Given that the two masts are 75 feet apart, this is straightforward. I attach the insulator end to the other mast and hoist the antenna into place. Hoist it securely when you do so it's tight. Note that the matching stub hangs down, which is what it's supposed to do. Now, I note that the feed line is balanced, whereas the coax is not, so there's a potential here for a choke balun. I should point out that this antenna, being fed from the end, is rather more stealthy than the standard dipole with its feed line hanging down in between. With my mast set up, my antenna is barely a quarter wave in the air, which means the matching stub nearly touches the ground. That's okay, but keep children or those who can't be kept from touching things away from the bottom of the matching line as well as the coax feed point, because both of these expose bare wires. Or, better, wrap them with electrical tape. Once it's in place, it's time for testing. I was rather anticipating a very nice 20-meter antenna. Thus, I was disappointed when I saw the SWR over 6-to-1. This was a non-functional antenna. What could I do? I checked the antenna with an ohm meter. After all, it should be a very low DC resistance from the far end of the dipole all the way around to the unused top end of the transmission line. It did, so no bad solder joints. I tried finding the resonant point using the antenna analyzer, which was near 13 megahertz, and here by resonance I mean the reactance is 0 or as low as I can get it. Even so, the real part of the impedance was around 100 ohms, meaning 2-to-1 SWR at least. Well, next let's test my coax. It's fed from my Yaesu FTDX 3000 through the MFJ-849 SWR meter, then via RG8X to the Lightning surge protector, and then from there was 50 feet of RG213 cable. The instructions clearly say that any length of coax will do. First, I checked the feed line from the SWR meter down through the far end of the RG213 cable. I did this by attaching it to my old Heathkit dummy load. Back in the shack, the dummy load provides very near 1-to-1 SWR across all HF, varying only slightly. So this tells me the mismatch is not inherent in the coax. Now, as I mentioned, the antenna was at least resonant a megahertz away. So I tried folding back some of the dipole to shorten it. This had minimal effect. I folded a lot more back. Again, minimal effect. The bottom line here is that no matter what I did, and I really tried, I could not get this antenna anywhere near a reasonable SWR on 20 meters. In fact, the real part of the impedance was very low in 20 meters and the reactance high, so even with a wide-range tuner, very little power would actually be transmitted. Disappointed, I took it down. Now, I eventually found the problem, but it's easier to describe the solution after we discuss the collinear. With my mast setup in place, it was easy to put up the collinear. It's two 20-meter dipoles, each being end-fed, so it's a full wavelength long on 20 meters, about 70 feet total, approximately the same length as the old 40-meter dipole. Thus, it fit handily between my 20-foot masts. Note that while each of the two dipoles is fed from the end, the antenna, as an assembly, is fed from the middle. Again, the matching stub hangs down. In my case, given that my masts are only 20 feet high, the coax attachment point is in easy reach. Eagerly, I raced into the shack for the SWR test. The tests with the antenna analyzer were encouraging, with the 20-meter band from 14.0 to 14.25 under 2 to 1, and the entire band under 3 to 1. Now, my FTDX radio has a built-in antenna tuner that touches that up nicely. So, with the tuner on, the radio loved the antenna. But what was even more amazing were the tests. In this clip, antenna 1 is the collinear, antenna 2 is my trusty vertical, antenna 3 is the MFJ-1835H cobweb antenna, which unfortunately right now is mounted in a place that picks up lots of noise. Note that the digital noise reduction feature is turned off on the radio. Let's listen.
Yes, sir. I think it sounds really good, John. And good audio response, high end, low end, and mid range sounds good to me. I'm using headphones here, so it sounds excellent, John. Paul may give you an indication too. KB4GYT, if he's still there. Was you copying him?
No, I did not copy him, John. Over.
Okay, very good. All right, Paul. Well, John. I'm sorry. Well, I'm glad to work you. What kind of AM transmitter did they have? Was it ARC-5 or what did they have on the...
Clearly, antenna 1, which is the collinear under test, is not only providing a stronger signal than the vertical, but also is a quieter signal. The vertical is performing as usual, and we note again that the cobweb is an antenna for those with little space, so I didn't expect it to perform as well. Now, note that the collinear up only a quarter wavelength will have a higher takeoff angle than the vertical. But the proof is in the hearing, and for the stations in the QSO at the time, the collinear was the clear winner. In theory, it should give about half an S-unit improvement over the vertical, but in practice, it was much higher than that for all the stations involved in the QSO. Okay, now back to the Zepp. I looked at the length charts on the MFJ website. Note that the Zepp and collinear have the same matching stub length, and the collinear, consisting of two dipoles end-to-end, is double the length of the Zepp, as it should be. I compared the lengths of the matching stubs and found them to be quite different. 14.175 megahertz is the center of the 20-meter band. Now, the wavelength of 14.175 megahertz is not 20 meters, which is just the name for the band, but rather 21.164 meters, using the formula for a wavelength in the metric system of 300 over 14.175. So a quarter wave matching stub would be 5.29 meters long, or 17.35 feet. But you have to take into account the 90% velocity factor of radio waves in window line. So a quarter wavelength would be 16.5 feet, and the half wavelength dipole should be 33 feet, again using the 95% velocity factor of open wire. Of course, in reality, given the antenna's environment, including being only a quarter wavelength high over somewhat iffy ground, The actual antenna will need some adjusting. Now, to the Zepp and Collinear. With my wife's help, I did some careful measurements. The Zepp's dipole element was 34 feet and 10 inches long, which is a bit different from the Collinear's elements, which were 35 feet on one side and 35 feet 8 inches on the other. Well, those numbers are different, but not markedly so. However, it's a different story with the matching stub length. From the shorted end to the feed point, the matching stub on the Zepp was 17 feet and 1 inch. The distance from the shorted end to the feed point is 1 foot. In contrast, the Collinear, which is a great antenna, as I've already shown, had a matching stub length of only 15 feet and 5 inches, or 18 inches less than the Zepp. The feed point is 1 foot 4 inches from the shorted end of the matching stub. So, with some trepidation, I removed 18 inches from the matching stub above where the coax connects, leaving all other measurements alone. In fact, this is the section I removed. I resoldered the matching stub connections and ran the antenna up on the test mast and found to my delight that the slightly modified Zepp provides an SWR of 1.8 to 1 or less across the entire 20 meter band. What a difference 18 inches makes. Well, all right, now that it works, how well does it perform? Let's listen to my radio again. Remember, the Zepp is not a gain antenna, so it should perform about the same as the vertical. In this clip, the Zepp is antenna 1, the vertical is antenna 2, and the cobweb is antenna 3.
Using a Heil Pro 7 microphone, and I'm running TB, which has given me about 320 PEP, over. Okay, well, for 6 feet above the ground, not doing bad.
Okay, so the performance is about the same as the vertical, but the Zepp is quieter, which is to be expected. Okay, now we're back to the subject of MFJ's quality control. I don't know the official measurements that Fred Race specified some years ago, but on my Collinear, one of the two horizontal dipoles is 8 inches longer than the other when they should be equal. Someone is not paying attention during the manufacture. And on the Zepp, I had to take a full 1.5 feet off the supplied 17-foot matching stub. None of the measurements on either antenna matches the web page length tables. Again, someone isn't paying attention. The manual says the lengths of the antenna wires and stub are quite critical and should not be changed. But given that the Collinear performed so well, I matched the Zepp stub to the length of the Collinear stub, and it had great results. Okay, let's talk now about use cases, first for the Zepp. It performs the same as a dipole, which means it provides normal signal strength and is a bit quieter than a vertical, for a whole lot less money. The Zepp is especially interesting for stealth in that there's no feed line hanging down in the middle in the backyard, although the instructions do suggest keeping both ends away from metal things. But if you have 33 feet clear in your yard, this antenna can be hung without drawing very much attention. Now, what's the use case for the Collinear? It's a bidirectional antenna with slight gain, although my tests showed rather more gain than expected. I really like this antenna, and I will permanently mount it in my yard. It does require a 70-foot clear run, and the feed line does hang down in the middle. MFJ suggests it be at least a quarter wavelength in the air, or around 20 feet minimum, which is what I have it, and suggests it will perform better at a half length, or about 40 feet off the ground. Note that if it's too close to the ground, the takeoff angle gets higher and higher. Here's the bottom line. Do I recommend these antennas? The answer, yes, as modified. Neither is a compromise antenna. The Zepp is an uncompromised half-wavelength dipole. The Collinear is even better than that. Given that 20 and 40 meters are the two most productive bands under current sunspot conditions right now, either 20-meter antenna would do well during the day and into the evening as a great adjunct to a 40-meter dipole, which will perform well into the night. So either of these antennas is a serious contender, and both perform as well as a vertical, and both are quieter than my vertical. If you found this video useful, please share it with your friends. If you purchase one of these antennas, let me know about your experience with it via the comments on this YouTube page. Also, let YouTube know that they should offer this channel to others out there by subscribing yourself and by clicking like. Take a look at my friend Randy's non-ham fun news site at thisistrue.com. Also, check out my tip jar and the Patreon page. And this is totally and vitally important. Please, please use both feet when walking. Until next time, 73.